Hey everybody, it's me, Kenny White, here at City Arts Salon. I want to welcome you to our YouTube channel, City Arts Salon. Today, we're going to bring to you a recent interview we've had with our current exhibiting artist, Rochelle Marcus Dinkin. She'll tell you about her work, her process, and her journey in the arts. So stick around for that. We also would like to let you know that you can keep up with everything that we do here at the City Arts Salon on our YouTube channel. We will be posting videos monthly, and hopefully you can check them out. And when you do, don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. We would appreciate that. So without further ado, here's Rochelle Marcus Dinkin.
So let's talk about like your artistic journey.
Okay.
How did you get started as an artist?
Mhm.
And was there some significant influence or event
Hmm.
that made you
Triggered it.
trigger?
Well, I always feel that I was an artist ever since I could, create. And I think that the significant thing that triggered it is my childhood, because it was a pretty intense childhood, and it was, my whole family was very creative one way or another. So there was creativity floating around, music, art, poetry, all this stuff. However, there was a lot of conflict and a lot of pain, and now what they call intergenerational trauma. But we didn't know that then. It was just what they say in Yiddish, tsuris, which means trouble. And I think as a result of that, I had to form a world to get away from the conflict, the turmoil, and the trouble. And, it was satisfying. It was a satisfying thing to do. And I think my mother worked with me a lot when I was little. She would sit and draw with me. I don't remember her consciously, but I know she did it, But, I was very young. I think like the first piece that that really was photographed and stuff, I was 5. And my father, who did photography, at the time, photographed it. And I had that piece when I had my show at the Academy. And it was the same agenda that I have now. It was a chorus line of women looking pissed off. And they had their hands on their hips, and they were very adorned, and they had expressions like, what the hell, and I was 5 years old. So I think I had thoughts in my head at that point, my feminist agenda was plopping out, So I think that's, was all the way through. Was my way of talking, was my way of relating. And like I said, through a pretty painful childhood, adolescence, life, I think that was either that or maybe I would have been violent. I don't know. But I think I had a better choice then. It gave me some.
You as an artist in your childhood,
Mm-hmm.
later in life, like what kept you at the art?
Well, I think 2 things. I think that, first of all, I continually had things to say. So my voice was always displayed through my art. And and the different parts of my life, I had, continuing things to say about who I am and where I am in the world. And the other thing is, I think I love making things. I mean, the joy of creation, I think, little kids, when they sit down and you scribble and you put colors on, it's a joyful thing. And I think that never left me. It's still fun in lots of ways. It's work, but there's a lot of fun to it because there's beauty, and there's all kinds of things in there. So I think those two things, having things to say, and you know, the joy of the process is always there, and I hope continues. Symbolism, and what was the other thing you had asked me?
The images, the,
Okay, well, I think it started off very early, not consciously. It was unconscious. I didn't have an agenda like I'm doing this, you know, but as I went on through the years, I saw different agendas that kept coming up, a certain vocabulary, you know, and always it always starts with a central character, which is the feminine, the heroine. And the heroine is in she's always in a story. And sometimes the stories are very specific, and sometimes they're very stream of consciousness. So it's, I think my earlier work was less stream of consciousness. And I think my later work is more, I'm interpreting it almost as in a dream. You know, I start with something and then I let it talk to me and then I see where it goes. Where when I was younger, I think I was more specific. Let me give you an example. Like the painting over there, it's called Farewell. And, you know, that's a pretty explicit title, Farewell. The angel is taking off. You know, she's leaving. And, you know, specifically, you see the two characters in the corner there. Well, they sort of represent my original family, my mother and grandmother. They form one person. They were like symbiotic. So she's saying, I'm leaving. That's it. Goodbye. You know, and, you know, of course, she's an angel, but she does have a face in her crotch, but whatever. We can, whatever that means or doesn't.
is she being tempted away by the devil in the crowd?
Well, I didn't quite think of it that way, but there's different, again, there's always levels in my work. So, and there's sort of strange humor, I think strange humor, because it's kind of this irony, you know, she's sort of triumphant and she's, you know, leaving, you know, the earth, but there is a sensual part there too. So that's represented also, you know, and the grounding sort of is the primary family. So that was, you know, a very specific idea. Now, I would say the piece over there in, I don't know the title of that. Exquisite Chaos. Okay. I would say that was a very abstract piece for me because it really did not have a specific agenda, but it has a lot of space that is sort of primordial. And then it has, you know, different people popping out in various places, like, here I am, here I am. You know, there's one figure sort of in a sort of tomb-like little space. You know, there's commentaries. You see, my work tends to have commentaries. And, you know, there's somebody waving, you know, up in the distance. So there's always lots of levels of, and even the process of the work has a lot of layers and everything has dual meanings and, you know, nothing is not symbolic. Everything is symbolic, you know, the colors. So it tends to be my process. But I would say I went from something that was quite specific to something that was, you know, I let it lead me. And it was a challenge to play with that abstract space and not have something so specific. Woman. She's going up in flames. She's on fire. She's within this enclosure, but she's, you know, ready to burst into flames. And the person in the egg above her is sort of watching the whole scene. A watcher, which is a character that always appears in a lot of my work. But again, this whole chorus line of these people in window-like structures, they're the commenters. They have something to say about everything. This really goes back to my childhood. I can remember my neighbors like commenting on my family, and I think that this whole chorus line of people commenting appears in a lot of my work, you know. And again, we have the sensual, the little devil behind her, you know, always this little duality of things that are existing. We have the gossips up in the corner, you know, and the fish always represent to me a life force that while all this is going on, these different levels of activity, there's a life force around them. And of course, these two dragon-like, I don't know if they're guarding her. They could be guarding her, you know, keeping the others off of her. Or, you know, they could be just scary, you know. So you have all these elements psychologically going on at one time. And I also think in terms of things like in dreams, usually people appear sometimes more than once. You're not just there one time. You come in and you have different incarnations within a dream and different things represent. So again, this is a story, but you know, many levels are happening at one time. And I think this really represents a real life force and a real talking about a heroine's life in a certain sense. Well, in retrospect and currently, I would have to say, well, first I'll start with my favorite artists, right? And I have to say, I guess, Hieronymus Bosch probably is number one because nobody can outdo his imagination. And even though a lot of it was terrifying and horrific, it was also sublimely beautiful. And I love that combination. And of course, he was a master at what he did. So technically, it was masterful. And psychologically, it was amazing because, you know, here he was from a whole different time period and he explored heaven and hell. And that's really a big range. So obviously, he was the maestro of combining things. So, and then, of course, the other artist that I really admire is Frida Kahlo, which I discovered after I was working the way I did. So I didn't really feel I patterned myself after her. I discovered her at a certain point and I related to her more than patterned myself. And what I found fascinating about her work is it really was quite visceral in some ways, painful, quite, you know, she had a terrible struggle in her life. And she transcended it through art in some ways. And it was a very inner world. She expressed a very inner world. You know, here she was married to Diego Rivera, who did these huge political, massive murals. And he was the polar opposite. And she was doing these intimate, personal, visceral paintings of her inner life. So, yeah, it certainly, I found it fascinating. So those two artists sort of, I like that range. I like the range. And okay, as far as other influences, I'm very attracted to medieval art because, again, I find it spooky because there's a lot of life and death and, you know, it's pretty terrifying, a lot of it if you look at it. But again, a lot of it's done exquisitely. So I seem to be drawn to that combination. I love African art. I love, again, there's this whole idea, from what I understand, that there's not a separation between utilitarian, sacred. Everything is beautiful, elegant in its way. And that's a very interesting idea, and magical. So I like all those elements together. And I love Indian art because, again, we have, you know, a lot of mythology, pattern, color, very sensual, and these are attractions. It's like tastes, like you like certain cooking or you like certain music, you're drawn to certain things. Okay, so I said African, Indian, medieval, Persian. But they're a bunch of psychos. No, I don't mean that like that. I just, I just mean that they do these little miniatures and they're done exquisitely once again. But if you look closely, somebody's head's being cut off and there's blood spurting out and it's done very beautifully. And just the idea of that, I found that fascinating, and so these were my main attractions, also Indonesian art, because that also is very based on mythology and characters, and it stands to reason that all drew me. And it's just like if I went around the world and I was tasting different cuisines, I would throw different tastes into my work. Well, I think that's what happened when I looked at things. I thought, oh, I like that. And that fascinates me. And I tried to play with that in my own work. And again, not so consciously, but sometimes consciously, like a new toy to play with. Like in my new work, a lot of the new work I've been doing on paper, and I'm using some new materials in there, some collage, some crocheted things, some jewelry. But I always look at it as new toys because I think you have to turn yourself on. You have to have some new goals and new. That's what's exciting. You can be old and it doesn't matter, And as long as I find things that I find exciting to play with, I enjoy that. So it appears, it's like, just like I said, putting a new spice in or a new instrument. If you're a musician and you have some new technique to play with or a new instrument you never heard, you can do different combinations. And I love the idea of infinite combinations. That drives me very crazy, So, well, when I think of process, I think of also mediums that I used. Now, for many, many years, I always drew. I started off in black and white, drawing and rendering. I studied at the academy, which is a very classical training. And although I really didn't listen to too much there, but I was there. And then, I went on to painting. And for many years, I worked in oil, which I love doing because I think oil paint is very different because I think of myself as a very indirect painter. I don't paint directly when I painted. I built up layers. So things had to be like translucent, so it wasn't a matter of anything direct. It was always indirect. And I could get certain qualities that you couldn't probably get with anything else other than oil. And oil, you can sit and paint forever because you can keep painting things out, which is sometimes not the best thing. But I think you can get effects that you can't get with other things. And I tend to, my original oil work was very ephemeral, very pale. And I think over the years, it became much more vibrant, much more, not aggressive, but the colors changed, the palette changed. And oil is a wonderful thing. However, there came a point where, I had an accident. I had a titanium shoulder. I'm left-handed. I really can't stand and hold a brush for hours, with my arm up. Plus, I think breathing in all those chemicals, I probably have half a brain. And so those things became more closed to me. But I will say, at this point, I work on a desk, I work on paper, and I work with a lot of mixed media, which, is anything from graphite, pen, pastel, ink, jewelry. So I have a real blend of instruments. And I miss oil in a certain sense, but I've gone on. And I have new challenges with new kinds of material, and I'm working with it differently. So that's, as far as process goes, uh, it always seems to start out, it's a strange thing. I start with an eye, and for some reason, and I build a character. And then from that particular character, I go on to create a story. Although that's one way I evolve at this point. But then sometimes, like, I'm just doing a piece now, and it's on a diagonal. And the only thing I really what I had in my mind is I feel diagonal, and I drew a line diagonally. And at the end of uh, the bottom part, there's a creature, and there's heads rolling down the hill, and the creature is eating the heads rolling down the hill. And then, of course, there is a trio of commentators in a little side issue commenting on what's going on. So that was it was specific, actually. And so that was the psychological process. But I don't do sketches, that's not really what I do. I just draw a line and little arrows. And then another piece I recently worked on, which is really kind of excruciating that I was doing, because it wasn't a fun piece. It was like, oh, let me get away from this. I can't deal with it too much. I call it Betrayed, Abandoned, and Rejected. And it's, this sort of mountain with a person at the top sitting. And then all within the mountain is all these heads being burned, just beheaded and burned. And then on either side is fingers. These creatures that sort of look like medieval creatures, and they're pointing the finger at the person on top of the hill. So it's sort of an indictment. They're indicting the person. So, and it's sort of my reaction to a lot of world events. So it's called Betrayed, Abandoned, and Rejected. But it's not an easy, it's almost finished. I'm trying to, and actually though, there is a creature that flies on top of all of this, above it all. So I don't know if that's transcendence after all that burning alive. Seem to be getting into a burning alive, but whatever, it's there. So, it's a range of psychological reactions and then technical play. And I do love to make circles. I think in my whole life, I've made like 10 million circles. I don't, it's so much fun, So I think that's my process.
Over the years that you've been an artist, you've developed your own philosophy of what art is and what it means. So can you talk a little bit about
Yeah, I did write this, and I have it on my website. And I think that, it sort of summarizes my feeling about art. So I'll read it to you. It'll be easy that way. Okay. I think I'll just do it numerically. I think number one, art is serious play. So I think that's so true. I think number two, art channels aggression. So I talked about those two things. Number three, art can be a healing tool, which I was an art therapist also, so that plays into that. I think that number four, art is a form of meditation. Number five, an artist is a magician who creates worlds dealing in the finite and the infinite. Number six, art is a puzzle that you put together and take apart. Number seven, art's a conversation. Number eight, art mimics the life process. First, there's desire, then conception, gestation, struggle, and finally, separation. That's a hard thing to do with pieces. Number nine, artists are warriors. To stay an artist, it's a struggle, especially as a woman. Let's say little parentheses. And number 10, an artist is a translator of the unconscious to the conscious. Number 11, in art, there is nothing that is inconsequential or irrelevant. Everything is interconnected as in life. And I just want to say right there, I always found that so fascinating because it's like there's nothing that doesn't matter in a piece of art. Like the smallest thing can change everything. So I just found that like so mind-blowing, that everything counts. Number 12, creativity is the heart of self-discovery. Number 13, art has the power to change lives and culture. And number 14, artists ignite ideas that are culturally relevant and necessary. 15, great art has no expiration date. And number 16, well, in conclusion, I'd like to say art for me has been my solace, my refuge, my salvation, my sacred space. It has given me the ability to transcend the struggles of life with resilience and spirit because I believe it is the language of the soul. That's pretty much the whole deal. Yeah.
You told me there was something else.
Yeah, well, recently I was thinking about art, and I was thinking in terms of, there's times I've studied a lot of things about the Talmud, the original sort of old Bible, the Torah. And it's interesting, what I thought in my mind is that artists are the modern day interpreters of the Talmud. Through the arts, they interpret, reinterpret, analyze, comment, and question. We seek to provide answers to age-old, eternal questions. Why are we here? What is our purpose? And do we matter? We engage in a continuing dialogue through the language of the soul. So that really, because that's what the Talmud did. It interprets and, comments. And I feel like that's what modern artists do. They're still answering the same questions. And I thought that was kind of an interesting way to look at it for me.
So what's been your experience at the City Arts Salon as a patron and now as an exhibitor?
Well, I think it's a very positive experience. I mean, I think you and Kenny are just great. And think that you put together a wonderful milieu, different than most art galleries in many ways, because it encourages dialogue among hopefully interesting people and artists, which is unusual. And it creates that space in many different ways by some of the things even the furniture that you set up for people to talk. And that's a nice thing. That's a very nice atmosphere. And, we've been coming here, my husband and I, for a couple years, and we really soaked it in. And we really feel it's very different than most of my experience with art galleries, which is not particularly wonderful, I would have to say, because I don't think a lot of things, most galleries do encourage dialogue. I think it's about something else. And I like that there's what I feel is a very different outlook on presenting art and interacting with the art and interacting with other people. And I think it's needed. It's a very needed thing.
Good.